Thank you all for joining us for a very topical discussion, aligning equity, diversity, and inclusion with a corporate mission purpose. Study after study shows that companies that have a strategy dedicated to aligning equity, diversity, and inclusion, otherwise known as EDI, have better business performance, are more innovative, and have better retention numbers. But making sure this strategy is tied with corporate mission and purpose is still not as common as it should be in the life sciences industry. Let's discuss how companies can make smart choices and make a difference to their employee base and the industry at large. I would like to briefly introduce our host this afternoon, Dr. Eric Dube, President and CEO of Retrophin, and our panel, all of whom are passionate about the topic of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Eric Dube, Ph.D., is a 2020 PharmaVOICE 100 who oversees a global team dedicated to identifying, developing, and delivering life-changing therapies to people living with rare disease. Also joining us are Laurie Cooke, a 2017 and 2009 PharmaVOICE 100. She's a dedicated advocate for gender parity, a world-renowned speaker, and thought leader. She is also ASE Mentor of the Year. And Robin Shapiro, a 2020 PharmaVOICE 100, who is bringing disruptive thinking to some of the world's most ambitious healthcare brands. For more detailed information about our panelists, please go to pharmavoice100.com. Eric, I turn it over to you to tell us and our audience why this topic is of importance to you and to the company, and how Retrophin is raising the bar.
I think it's a critical time, and it's something that I've been passionate about for my entire career. I've seen how important it is, both in the professional capacity, but also in the mission that we as an industry and as a company have. As a gay man, there were so many times early in my career where I didn't feel like I belonged, and I didn't see others that were like me. And so I want to make sure that as an employer, first and foremost, that everyone feels like they can come to work and be their best and true selves, and to see that this is an industry for them. And for the mission that we do, sadly, we see that not just does rare disease not discriminate, it can affect and does affect everyone. But once a patient is affected by rare disease, if they're a person of color, sadly what we're seeing is that the time to an accurate diagnosis is much longer. The ability to access clinical trials is much lower. And the ability to access and afford effective therapies is less. And we believe that we can change these inequities, and that's the role that we want to play. So one of the most exciting things that we're doing is in partnering with Black Women's Health Imperative. And earlier this year, we have helped to create the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition, which is comprised of about 40 incredible leaders, both in rare disease, such as NORD and Global Genes, as well as healthcare leaders within communities of color, all focused on addressing some of these challenges, whether it's in the policy platform or in the time to diagnosis, or perhaps in accessing clinical trials. So we believe that we have an important role to play that sadly has been lacking, not just within rare disease, but broadly within the healthcare arena.
Where we may say that we have laws or protections around discrimination, but we know that once we may not have the same type of equitable access to support information and development opportunities that inevitably will exacerbate some of the biases and inequality that we see persist today.
Excellent. And I'm going to turn to you, Robin. I know that this is an issue that you're addressing at TBWA World Health. How are you managing some of these conversations in terms of equity and equality?
Well, thank you, Taren. First of all, I just love leaders. So my comments are going to be in the context of agency leadership, which we believe the first thing is, yes, we work with clients all day, but we have to focus on internally. How do we make it right internally first, instead of thinking about how do we always bring things to our clients? And that for us starts with our values, really the values of which we organize ourselves against. And those three values for us are be authentic, do good, and raise hell. And those are really the underpinning of our approach to this topic. Being authentic means being able to show up as who you really are every day, your authentic self. Doing good means making sure that we are doing right by our community. And then raising hell means, yes, constantly pushing for what we know is right, and for pushing the boundaries of inclusion and diversity. So we have been on this mission for some time. This year, prior to even all of the recent activities, we set an intention around supercharging our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and created a group of change champions. We're calling them change ambassadors, a diverse group within our agency that is charged with laying out a 5-year strategic plan, which does also begin with adding more diversity to our leadership team. And also, most importantly, creating an inclusive environment for everyone, which kind of touches upon Eric's comment. It's not just about providing equal opportunity. It's about, in a way, disproportionately favoring people who have an unfair disadvantage coming in. So there's a lot of work being done right now to look at how that can come to life.
Excellent, Robin. Thank you so much. And I have a little insider baseball on this, but that's what it is. And I'm going to turn to Laurie and ask her how the HBA, the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association, is leaning into EDA and the work that it's doing through its collaborative initiative.
Well, insider baseball, Taren, as long as it's not the Cubs, it's the Phillies, we will move on. So the Gender Parity Collaborative is where a number of companies have joined together. They have been absolutely committed to achieving gender parity. And I'll just make a quick aside. Gender is the largest diversity group. So if we can tackle gender, then we can apply the learnings from gender to the other groups that we're trying to make sure are brought up to parity. So one of the things, it feels like the elusive holy grail that we're looking for, and we so wanted to bring these companies together and find that silver bullet. And our aha is there isn't a silver bullet. This is not a pipeline issue. This is not something's wrong with women. So this is about the inherent systemic inequity that has been built into the system. Rightly or wrongly, work was built, offices were built for men, typically white men. And so everything was built around that. So we have to start to get to how to really unpeel this and build it back up. And the most important thing is looking at data. If you don't know where you are now and where you're going, we'll just circle. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is working together to figure this out using data with the commitment is what is really making the Gender Parity Collaborative jump ahead of companies in their cohort comparatively.
We talked about things that need to be done, but part of this is also about accountability. So who is accountable for changing this dynamic? Is it at the top, Eric? Is it your role to change this? Is it your role, Robin, to make sure that this is happening within your organizations? Or you're looking at it from an organizational association purview. So tell me how you're holding your direct reports and your actions account, and how are you being accountable? Eric, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that it has to start with accountability at the top. And I think that where we see change happen as bright spots within companies, it's where leaders have held themselves and their teams accountable. And what we're doing is, last year when we were setting our 2020 objectives for the year, we said that we would set a goal for diversity in our organization and ensuring that we have a diverse and inclusive culture and organization. And I think that started a conversation, and it was uncomfortable, but it actually forced us to look at what practices are working and what practices and behaviors aren't. And this is a long road that we have to go on, but I think it's in starting an accountability and also having our organization, we have a diversity council that was recently created. They're helping to set the priorities so that they're started with our employee base in mind, but the leaders are held accountable for supporting and making that change happen. I believe that that's what we're going to have to learn and continue to grow from. That's the only way I believe that we're going to be able to change and see the improvements.
Awesome. Robin?
Yes.
So you're the boss. So.
Absolutely, I'm the boss. There's no doubt that it ultimately does, it is on me to set the tone for this and to actually set the priorities for the organization overall. I would add to that every single employee in the agency, as part of our agency goal, is expected to participate in the solution. So there's accountability within every single employee to live up to their part of that. That can be in the form of how they show up for learning events. It can be in the form of how they participate in a committee, or if they have an idea, and how we will help them see that idea through and see it to realization. Because I believe you have so much more power in activating the entire company against a goal as opposed to an individual against a goal. So for us, it's obviously starts from the top, but it kind of is living in every single employee of the agency.
So it's like an amoeba. It's going out there. And
Exactly.
Bring it back to science, Taren. That's it.
I was tripping my thing there. Yeah, and I was going to ask you, Laurie, you touched on this a little bit about metrics, and you don't know where you've gone. You don't know where you're going until you know where you come from. So what are some of those metrics that companies need to look at in terms when they set their strategies, as Eric is doing and Robin is doing?
Well, and Taren, one of the biggest things that was recognized in the last McKinsey study was the biggest gap area was the number of women moving into the managerial roles. So even though they were heavily more women than men, they weren't moving into the manager level, and then the whole pipeline breaks down. And something as simple as just if we did 50-50, men and women moving into the managerial role, in 5 years, we'd have 1 million more women in the talent pipeline. So, you know, and how can it not be 50-50 when there's way more than 50% women at that level? So I think one of the things we can ask companies to look at is, they call it in McKinsey language, the broken rung. So I would look there. But the other thing I would do is I would help manager realism in teams. You know, it's much easier to have a team where everybody thinks the same. You can finish each other's sentences. You can all use the same baseball lingo and everybody knows what it means. It's much harder when you have a team that is diverse. They're coming from different backgrounds. So you have to work harder, but the end result is better. So I think helping people to see this isn't going to be the same. It will be different, and add some, here are the how-tos, and then people are much more likely to be able to feel they have the tools necessary to do the job you're asking them to do.
So that's fantastic, and I love that. Yes, you know, that healthy conflict is what is needed in terms of moving any kind of creative or project along, because if everyone, as you said, thinks the same, it's just going to be the same result time after time. So if we are going to enact change, you have to have diverse perspectives come to the table. I'm going to ask to see if we can't launch our poll here. Eric, you obviously have somebody in this position, and you know, Robin, you were talked about having somebody in charge of looking at your company. So how many of you in the audience in your company have somebody who is dedicated to D&I or the equivalent of D&I officer? So thank you, Mara, for launching. Let's give it a second to see, because that'll be kind of an indicator in terms of how much more we have to go. Hopefully the number is very high.
So it looks like we have about 60% or so with no. It's a bit of a split, 60-40. I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share it with the audience so that everybody can see it. 62 no, 38% yes.
Thank you so much, Mara. So we are seeing then that there is still quite a bit of work to do. So Eric, when you were setting up your strategy to address this issue, how did you go about structuring this?
Sure.
I think that's a great lesson for our audience.
Yeah, well, I think the first is that we aligned our objectives with our mission. our mission, we're a dedicated rare disease company. And we talked about it not just in how diversity is right for the health and the performance of the business, but how it's very deeply connected to our mission. You know, as I mentioned, we're focused on bringing a treatment for rare renal disease. Those rare renal diseases that we're studying, we see it disproportionately affect African American, Black, and Latinx communities. What are we doing to make sure that we understand the journey and how it's perhaps different, how the barriers are unique? And if we have an organization that's not diverse, then I think we're going to have challenges in deeply understanding those communities and how, you know, their journey is different. How do we make sure that clinical trial recruitment is reflective of the demographics of these patients? So I think what we did is we tried to understand how is it connected to our mission? Where are there aspects that we need to make sure that we are focused on diversity and inclusion and equity, and then make sure that we set out an agenda. And that agenda is set both functionally, but also with our diversity council to make sure that they're helping to inform and align some of that work. It's early days in much of this, but it's very much integrated into how we run the business rather than a separate part of our strategy.
I hear that it's purposeful and it's not just a nice to have.
That's
it's
right.
A must to have.
I think the only other thing, Taren, if I can add, is that we have to do this collaboratively with the external experts. So one example is we're not doing this all ourselves because we don't have the experience to go on. So we've created or helped to create a rare disease diversity coalition with Black Women's Health Imperative. And we've got incredible experts from the patient community and the medical community so that we can co-create solutions for the future. And I think that's the other part, is we need to be humble that we're not going to have all of the solutions as a company.
Awesome. And I think that's a theme that we've been hearing all day too, is that level of collaboration and partnership is necessary across every intersection of what we are doing to bring better drugs to patients. And this is that's another piece of it. Robin, you talked earlier about your ambassadors. So how are you setting yourself up in your organization?
So we've divided our efforts, and just to second what Eric is saying, this does come down to, you know, our overall strategy as a company of being the disruption company and champion diversity in everything we do. So it begins there. But then we have sort of 3 platforms within our overall strategy. The first is just internally, in terms of how we're driving diversity, equity, and inclusion at the agency level. The second is how we're showing up in the community, how we're showing up in the outside world as an agency. Some of you may have seen our Black Health Now initiative, which was launched in February, and has really brought a lot of visibility to the inequity that exists for people of color, specifically Black people, in their health experience. So that's kind of one way in which we're showing up to the outside world as a company that embraces and is championing diversity and equity and inclusion. And then the third way is through how we bring this thought process to our clients. So many of our clients have products that disproportionately impact diverse populations. Showing up to those groups with empathy and really understanding of their condition is so critical. So we're guiding our clients in terms of how they can market themselves, how can they appeal to their communities in an authentic way, in a way that understands their particular background and history and orientation up to the topic.
Excellent. And Laurie, I will ask you the same. I know that it's not necessarily the same correlation, but you have been seeing some of this through all of the companies that you interact with in terms of the role of the collaborative, as well as your role as a thought leader on this topic.
Well, one of the things we're seeing is a much more significant embracing of the topic, and people are seeing the outcome of actually having gender diverse teams, et cetera. So I think the business case is there, and now what we're finding is that now there's a spectrum that's starting to spread out where some companies actually have achieved gender parity, but the challenge is when you peel that back, it might be gender parity, but it's white women. And so now companies are starting to pivot to say, we really need to look at this in a broader way. So I think the race and ethnicity piece, not only in the US, but race looks different in terms of racial equity from where you're sitting in the world. But the piece that I'm loving is seeing companies are much more in tune with this. So right now, one of the things that they are seeing is that women are disproportionately being impacted by the pandemic because the children being at home and now having to actually educate them and oversee, from kindergarten up to high school and even college, they are having to potentially even step away from their jobs. So where they thought they had really got a pipeline, it was strong, succession plans, is now being jolted into a very uncomfortable situation because it uncovers women tend to be the primary caregiver for children and elderly parents. And so all the things that, the progress we had made may be taking a bit of a hit, besides the other pieces that I think, Eric, you made. So many of different races, ethnicities are more impacted by disease and all of the other pieces that are coming along. So Taren, it is a really interesting time right now.
It certainly is. One of the comments that just came in was that just having a D&I officer does not mean the company is truly taking action on D&I. And I think that is a call to action for the industry, that it can't just be lip service, that they really have to they have to lean into this if they're going to make a marked difference. And that relates to the one question we can get to before our time is up in about 2 minutes, unfortunately, because we could talk about this for another hour, is what type of diversity goals have you set? And well, they'll put you in the hot seat, Eric. When you set your diversity goals, have you achieved those goals when you're looking at hiring the most talented of the candidates, not just the most talented that fit a particular diversity goal? So how are you using metrics?
Sure. So we do track the demographics of our organization, and then we track our hiring and the candidate pools. And I think what we're seeing is where we have diverse candidate pools, we are hiring a more diverse workforce. And I think we've seen great progress through this year. I think the challenge, and I think that's more so for gender diversity than for ethnicity. And I think that's where we've got to figure out what can we do more to attract and tap into talent. And also, how do we make sure that we are filling that pipeline as early as possible in areas like STEM education for women and for communities of color. So those are areas that we're looking at when we look at the metrics and down through the line.
So I think we can be proud of the steps that we've taken, but we can also be very realistic in understanding that we have many, many more steps to take before we get someplace where we are really dealing with equity on a real level. I can't thank you all enough for sharing your insights with us and being part of our 24-hour celebration marathon.
For more PharmaVoice 100 content, visit www.pharmavoice100.com.